So this is, I think, my fourth or fifth time seeing this little masterpiece. It grows on me more and more. I loved it the first time I saw it. So congratulations to you both. Couldn't be more timely. I thought one place to start, I met Stephen this afternoon and I met Clare 11 minutes ago, just before the film started. So this was your brainchild, I take it, Clare?
Hello? Yeah. Well, the Financial Times asked me to write something because they had a new platform which was journalism but with the creative arts. So they wanted something which brought both together and they wanted to do something about the border. So they asked me to write a film and then I wrote that and asked Stephen to film it.
A couple of very good decisions on your part and on theirs. So can you tell us a little bit about what writing the film meant? The prose, which is fabulous, the rhymes, the sort of irregular rhymes of it work, I think, beautifully. Stephen executes them beautifully. So you wrote the text. How much of the screenplay, as it were, how much of the direction did you
well, the text was mine, but then all the brilliance that you see on the screen was the fantastic team that the Financial Times put together. So there was a great director of photography, they really did their work, and Juliet, the director, was fantastic, wasn't she? And it just was very beautiful and very simple, and Stephen actually chose the location because it's something that he was really familiar with.
And what is the location?
It's a place called Trinity between it's between Derry and County Derry and County Donegal, and I cross that bridge every time I go to Donegal. And my kids used to love it because of that weird, beautiful bridge. And it's just like going into a magic place and everything. So and actually it was incredible. And, to think that that's something like with a threat, It was brilliant.
That bridge is there's a shot which goes right in the middle of the bridge, and that's the border. That's exactly where you cross the border. So it was lovely that Steve was able to stand there and speak the words.
And can you talk a little bit about, since this theme is a cultural intervention, it's not as if a kind of journalism you've written is not a cultural intervention, it is. But this seems more thickly cultural an intervention than writing an article for the Irish Times or for the Observer.
I don't know. I suppose I definitely wasn't thinking of it as a cultural intervention when I was sitting at my laptop or getting up early in the morning to, try and finish it off or whatever, I was just thinking, what does it mean for us here on this island? What do people, what do we feel? And I suppose I should start a bit further back. Before the Financial Times asked me to do it, before I even knew that I would be asked, I was really aware of what I was hearing on the news, what people were saying, that that magical thinking that the EU accused the UK of, and that sort of leapt out to me every time I heard it. And then I kept, once you notice something, you keep noticing other instances. So all those quotes, which at the end of the film were listed, are real quotes because I kept hearing it. And I mean, you're living here and you're hearing the opinion of other people about what's going to happen to your country. It's very, it kind of really gets you. So I wanted to, that's what I wanted to convey, I think. And also to know that identity is imagination, so that's what we're dealing with, and that's why nobody can figure it out, because it's not hard and fast. So I think that was the genesis of it. I wasn't trying to intervene.
In the version of the film I saw, the sort of footnotes for the quotes appear in the back. I'm not sure if that played for us.
I think it cut off just before.
So I think it was W15 W.C. Fields said that people who stop to read footnotes are like people who go down to answer the doorbell on their wedding night. You put the footnotes in which was an interesting move. It leaves one a little bit disoriented at the beginning. I guess Toby
Young, that was the main.
Toby Young
Yeah.
and
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Jacob Rees-Mogg. I guess those are sort of household names within on these islands in this debate. But for us, for me, it was
And Boris.
Boris and those. But sort of, first of all, the self-consciousness about political language, which is the thing we were talking about this morning, and I kept telling people, see this film tonight, it's really the thing we're talking about. That self-consciousness about the medium of political language and the sort of satirist's impulse to impersonation, right? Because there's a sort of impersonation of those comments. It isn't just a quotation of them. That struck me as a kind of a bold move for a way to kind of carry the thing forward. Did you hit on that right away, or is this something you...
Well, again, I think it's because I read an article by Toby Young, and I've never met Toby Young, so I have no personal beef with him. But it made me so angry. There was an article in The Spectator, and he said, there hasn't been a hard border since 1923, so I don't know why everybody's getting into it. And I thought, oh, well, that's weird, because my mother comes from Cork, and since I was a baby, all the way through to being an adult, I went to Cork across the border at least 6 times a year, and there was police vans and army shone their lights into the back of the car, and the car was searched, and there was, there definitely was a hard border, but it was printed in The Spectator, and lots of people who don't know about it probably have read it and then thought, it hasn't been a hard border in Ireland since 1923 or so. So as soon as I got the opportunity to reply to Toby Young, I did.
And not only that, you got a man to play the part of...
Yeah, he said that's my favourite thing that Stephen does. It's like the sort of hour of Toby Young.
It's a great kind of Swiftian launch of the film. Anger. We were talking this morning about the difference between rage and anger. And Amanda Anderson said, I'm not for rage, what we need is anger. Anger is what's productive. And I asked, well, what about outrage? And she said, no, I'm okay with that. You do outrage really well. Yeah, you do outrage really well. And it's, it doesn't actually feel like rage. It feels like the outrage, anger part of the spectrum. This must have given you a lot of pleasure to do this. Yeah.
Oh yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. She's a wonderful writer, and you read it and you think, well, it would be great to speak from that. That's the only part an actor has. And yeah, I loved it. And I loved it because the language was not aggressive, or it was just reasonable and decent and experienced. And it made you feel that she was representing people in a way that their needs should be met. It's not a big deal. We just want to live in a certain way. And the arrogance of the British over this whole Brexit thing has been shocking. And it had an impinge on their own lives, but it's the idea that, we're going to do everything to stop the backstop. It's crazy. And of course, that's because they depend on the DUP for their votes and everything, but to plunge us back in time is absolutely unthinkable.
So I went off and read, since we talked this afternoon, I went off and read the article about you in the Independent. You want to talk about the trouble you made there? It sounds like you did good work.
Oh, this morning?
Yeah. You haven't seen it yet?
No, I did see it. But I was invited by people running this to give an interview. I don't really like to give interviews, so I told the journalist, and I thought the Independent It was a terrible newspaper.
That is the first line of the article.
And I didn't think that the Irish Times was much better. Unreadable. I mean, when we opened in Derry in 1980, Douglas Gageby, who was the editor of the Irish Times, did an editorial about it. That's the kind of, response we got. It was fantastic. Gageby was a fantastic editor, and most of these people who are writing in the paper, he would throw their copy back at them. I know he would. He'd say, "There's no content. Go back and work on it." He would. He was great, wasn't he, Gageby? It drives me mad. And that's why this is such perfection, because it is a form of journalism, but it's perfect.
So, do you have advice for Boris Johnson about how to handle Russia?
Get a neighbour who doesn't have a recording device. Get a neighbour without a recording device.
So I sense that, I know this crowd likes to join in and talk. They haven't had a chance in a while. I can see a lot of the squirming and toward the back. And so I actually thought I'd give us a good 30 minutes or so to open it up and let people ask what they want. The range of questions is broad. I mean, it could be about, it's just technically the screen moment of the triptych. So we could talk about, in a certain sense, field day on the screen. This is, you guys are sort of field day people in a way. He signed you up for the field day production up in Derry. Field day on the screen. I was going to ask you before about whether Jordan's films or some way come out, the Crying Game come out of field day in any way. We could talk about that, or we could not talk about that. Or we could talk about Brexit itself. We could talk about this film. We could talk about the poetics of this film, which is part of its cultural intervention. So I thought maybe I would just throw it open now and see what kind of questions we got.
Nobody has a question.
Where's Lou? Shirley has a question.
Hello. A question. I'm just wondering if there has been a political reaction from the political establishment across the border to hard border.
I don't think so, no. I think it was, it went viral in a way that means a lot of people saw it. But there hasn't been any, no, I've had no, Toby Young didn't get back to me.
Over there.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Hi, Stephen. Thanks for that very much. I was just interested if you might talk a little bit about the role of poetic language in that. I mean, and how is poetic language being used, as it were, Clare as well, right? I mean, how are you seeing poetic language as an intervention into political speech and political discourse? Is that part of, how it's trying to make a point? I see some of the references to W.B. Yeats and other poets in there. Is it kind of making a commentary in that way?
Well, I love writing poetry, and I think that at a time like this, sometimes there's no direct way to respond to a problem other than through poetry, which sounds really pretentious, but I mean, it's just a way of evoking a feeling. I suppose that's what it does, rather than give you a hard line political argument, because we have so many of those that don't really get below the surface. And I just think poetry can go a lot deeper, obviously. But any references to WB, it's a bit unconscious. I'm very glad to hear it.
Unconscious and inevitable.
Yes. But I think that we could do a film all about our discourse, and because it helps people articulate how they feel, and if you can understand how you feel, then maybe you can translate that into some sort of political argument, and that will have more of a measure than a circularity, which is all I'm hearing at the moment.
I'm kind of trusting the people with the pink shirts to help us out finding the questions, because I can't see where.
Someone here.
I just wanted to ask, I think it's wonderful that the film went viral and that lots of people saw it therefore. But it's a once-off 15-minute film. Brilliant, but once. What's the next one? Shouldn't the FT be wanting to do another 5? It's all getting serious now.
Well, Stephen has permission to produce a film for the 2020 Field Day extravaganza.
Actually, the first thing Field Day did with Clare was a play called Farewell, which was, was based about the end of the Troubles. A man is in hiding because he's betrayed his fellows, and I just find it was incredible as he looked into his conscience. It wasn't political. It was about something political, but I just found it just incredible. And then actually some stupid critic said, "Why would a young woman bother with this stuff?" I thought, I really and truly, that was a woman who said that, by the way. And I thought, Jesus Christ, and we did a reading of it in London, and of course none of the theatres particularly were interested. And I couldn't believe it, and I went home and read it in tears again, and then I said, I'm just going to do it myself. And then with this, I think this is a piece of perfection as a piece of art in terms of its concerns and its delivery and everything in it. So I was commissioning Clare to do a play, and then I suddenly had this, I just thought, why don't we do a film? It doesn't have to be like a narrative film. It doesn't have to be a ghastly American film plot everywhere.
I was in the middle of writing a ghastly American film.
Not that Stephen would ever act in such a
I know where it can be whatever it is, that's all I'm saying, but it just that it would have ideas in poetry, it would be a film. And maybe Juliet would direct it, and we'd have a couple of drone shots. So I want to do that for next year, because it's been commissioned in the context of that, it will inevitably have something to say about our refusal to deal with all of the people of the world in a reasonable way.
Juliet is the person from the Financial Times who directed Hard Boredom. Can you say a little bit about her direction?
Probably better for you as the actor.
No, I just loved her. She was fantastic. I don't always like directors. But I thought she was incredibly sensitive, incredibly clear about the language, incredible about what she wanted to say. And when I finished the all spoken bit, I went away into Donegal to see my friends over in French Island, and on my way back, I went across that bridge again, and there was Juliet still picking up shots and drones and everything. And I thought she was brilliant. And I also think if the Financial Times is advising you not to go for Brexit, why would you go for Brexit? It's the Financial Times.
The title of our panel this morning was The Radical Middle. We were talking this afternoon, you and I, Stephen, about the oral performance of poetry, and you said you've gotten some advice from Samuel Beckett about reading, which was, never mind the meaning, focus on the rhythm.
Don't think about rhythm. Don't think about meaning,
Think about rhythm. It has a better rhythm. So I just wanted to ask a question about this in respect to the director mainly, although Clare's language has its own rhythmic quality, which is part of what makes it work. This is a hard thing to talk about, I'm sure, but I think it might be worth it. Can you say something about how the rhythm of that film gets established? Because it strikes me as it rhythmically successful, both in your language and in the way the montage works, the way the cutting works. Stephen walks across this way, back this way.
I think that is a hard one because we need Juliet here to talk about that and the director of photography, because they did so brilliantly marrying up the words with where we were and how they did it. And I haven't put the word rain or rain, but they still got rain. But I don't know, it's hard, isn't it? I mean, did you have a process with Juliet when you were talking through how you were going to do things, or did they just find good locations for you to stand?
There.
Yeah, but I'm sure this is an artifice.
I just did what I was told. No, really, it was not normal for me, but yeah, I thought she was so great.
Yes, yeah.
The stuff was so great. The guys were tremendous.
The location, I suppose, lends itself to that because there's the beautiful bridge, a river, that bus stop, which is lovely. Our director of photography turned out to be a horse whisperer as well, so when there were wild horses coming too close, he seemed to shoot them. And it sort of just worked itself in a way, I think. I don't think Juliet had a clear idea of what she was going to do before she got there, because she was just going to see how it went, I suppose. And
she's a natural.
Yeah.
One of my favorite sequences in the film comes at the moment where you say, sometimes magic is what you don't see. And that's everyday life after 1998. And then that's rhythmic too, because you get that sense of the rhythms of ordinary life in the background. I thought that was really nicely managed.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's not theoretical, it's just good.
Yeah. Let's see if we've got another question. Here's one. We've got a couple of people.
I loved the film, and I thought it was powerful and simple and honest and true and direct, and I would love everyone in Britain to see it and hear it. And I feel urgent about it, to say 2020 is the day of doomsday. And now it needs to be seen. It needs to be seen in the same way that we watch the debates in Parliament, and some politician stands up and says X, and we're all quoting it to each other at the dinner table that night. Is this film, is BBC going to show it? How do we make it heard? Because the perspective is so true and so real and so simple. That's what's not being heard at all in anything I'm seeing on the news or anything. And is there an answer to that question?
That's really lovely of you to say that. Thank you. It went all over the internet, and then apparently, I think 2 million people watched it on various platforms, and I think RTV showed it.
They did show it. Clare show.
But in the way of these things, it's sort of, puffs up and then it dies down because so many other things take its place. So I don't know, I suppose this is good because maybe it'll get another little life.
You're preaching to the converted.
Yes, we really are, yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. I don't know. There's no answer
Feel
to
like
it.
fire
Yes,
about it, you know,
yeah.
and
Yes.
BBC did not pick it up. They haven't shown it.
Yeah, just to try to broaden it out a little bit, if that's possible, is it too surprising, we say, of the government and spokespeople's reactions and understanding in relation to the border in Northern Ireland, when that has been fairly consistent over centuries in relation to Ireland. But they're probably not alone. Coming a little bit closer to time and the Good Friday Agreement, which for most, I think, the island of Ireland were very supportive of and have been very supportive of. But it would appear, my sense of it is, that both governments took their interest away from what was happening in Northern Ireland and eventually led to the ending of the executive and creating a certain amount of tension there. Also, during 2015 and 2016, I had a particular interest in the border and Northern Ireland, and I wanted to make a response to it. Because one of the things I noticed at the time, that despite the great publicity and activity in relation to commemorations here of pivotal historical events, there was practically no focus on the border whatsoever. Even though there was activities there and commemorations, because this was the one country, it was at the time 100 years ago, but there was, and I think it was deliberately done, because even in historical and some cultural events, conferences, it was not wanted to be engaged in. Yet, and that was part of my response, was to be in relation to that, why that was, and for my own particular artistic response. But when it came to Brexit, it was almost instantaneous, the response. And that really, underneath it, well, I completely understand the hard bother and no deal Brexit and so on, the consequences. But really, that's quite revealing of what the interest is in the people of Northern Ireland, on both sides. And remember, it's often trotted out that it's an English nationalistic response. For the most part, in the four areas, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales and England, we're talking about in between 10% between a no and a yes. So it's fairly widespread, the view. And in my view, there's nothing wrong with being quite critical of the EU. Because some people want to leave the EU, some people want to leave the UK. There's legitimate reasons. I could, mention a number. What people do, as in any conflict or unexpected situation in its life, is how we respond to it. But here, unfortunately, there seems to be pretty much a one view acceptable in relation to it. Particularly in the arts and culture community. Politics is slightly different. People have to, put forward their position strongly and so on and so forth. But in the arts and culture, so we understand better, rather than repeat old patterns.
Thank you. More of a comment than a question. You were doing your... Thank you.
I mean, I'm very aware of how they select what they commemorate, and I think the 100th anniversary of 1916 was done in a very mealy-mouthed way, It's the foundation of the state. It was not as violent as a lot of other things have been. The First World War that surrounded it was far more violent, and in the 400 years that preceded it was pretty violent in this country. I don't see why you wouldn't acknowledge the people that gave their lives for independence. Maybe don't want independence, but I do. And I'm grateful for it. And I would like to see the North moving slowly and peacefully towards that. Do you enjoy it? Yeah. What?
That's what I asked about. I was bringing up the actual commemoration of
I can't hear you, sorry.
Yeah, I think we're going to. I think we're going to do the next question now. We'll follow up afterward, okay?
I have a question as a question. I actually want to ask a question about the tone of the film. Going back to that question about anger that we discussed earlier. The thing that jumped out at me was not so much the direct response to Toby Young, but the line, and forgive me, I'm not going to get it verbatim, but when we took down the barriers, we didn't think we were doing it temporarily. When we smashed the concrete and burned the wood. And the way the film opens, the tone I heard was one of the sort of incredulous pissed offness. I can't believe these comments are so removed from the whole lack of acknowledgement of the border in the Brexit debate. It's so divorced from reality. But then I thought more about the setting, which is beautiful, but there is also this somber undercurrent, and I wonder if you would agree, there's also a sense of impending catastrophe.
Yeah, I think you analysed well the feelings. And the sort of, I suppose, the mixture of feelings about disinformation plus feeling incredulous that this huge event in my lifetime, which was the Good Friday Agreement, which we were just sort of like carefully, it just felt like as a whole society in North we were tiptoeing away from the Good Friday Agreement, like year on year, saying, oh, it's still there, it's still okay, it hasn't fallen down around our ears, right? We've got 1 year, 2 years, yes, it's still there, and then you get 10 years in, and you sort of think, yeah, that's it, and you're moving on, and then suddenly, 20 years in, you think, oh no, this was just an expedient move, or what, you ask, was that an expedient move by politicians to clear up the Good Friday problem and move it on, and then, well, they've just kept all the pieces that they can quickly, and that's, I think, that's the question, you're asking a question, one is asking a question, but out of the feeling of impending doom, because that seems to be suddenly a foregone conclusion you didn't know. That as you walk away from the Good Friday Agreement, you round a corner, and suddenly here we are, and it's all back to the beginning again. And yeah, there's a feeling of the doom is not foregone, but we're kind of trying to paint it and say this is what could happen.
I'll come to Luke in a second. I just want to ask as a follow-up whether you wrote what you wrote knowing that Stephen would read it.
Yes.
Because your voices are so different.
Yes. Yeah. And he was in my mind.
Yes.
Well, just probably relating it, to the earlier discussion about field day and pamphleteering. When Trump was in Ireland a few weeks ago, he suddenly found common cause with the Taoiseach. He said, I believe you've a border problem too. and our Prime Minister once made sense. He said, well, we're trying to take down the border. You were trying to raise it. And Trump said, oh, that's a big difference. I hadn't realised that there was a slight problem with what we have in common. But in fact, that came up at earlier discussions, that borders are for crossing. Border crossings is what is important about a border. And borders are for our bridges. And I think that notion of the border as a bridge and the border as something for crossing, as against borders for checking and for blocking. And that tension is well caught in the film, I think, because of there's a kind of intersection. There's the bridge going one way and the river going another way. And then there are shots of Stephen by the river. And so the shots are at a right angle. There's an intersection as well as contact. And I thought that was very well brought up. But the link to what we were talking about earlier has to do with the notion of the pamphlet as an intervention in public debate and in current affairs. Because one of the ideas behind Field Day's reliance on the pamphlet in the beginning of its publication projects was taken from Jonathan Swift. Edward Said had written a remarkable article on the pamphlet as a form of journalism that has no sell-by date. The difference between the pamphlet and the column in the newspaper is that the column in the newspaper may indeed be well written, and indeed is by some journalists obviously well written, but the pamphlet is a very distinctive kind of writing in which the language draws attention to itself and it becomes richer, and that's exactly what you've done, Clare, in the piece. You have it, even though it's journalism of a kind, and even though it's an intervention that has a longer shelf life than its immediate sell-by date. And that was the way Swift conceived of the pamphlet, that this pamphlet will live on even when the issue is maybe momentarily resolved or addressed. Edmund Burke had the same attitude towards pamphlets. We still read those pamphlets, even though the issues, the water has flowed by them long ago. So I thought that what's remarkable about the film is it applies as much to Mexico-American border. It applies to Syria. It applies to other border conflicts, and particularly to the edges of Europe, where the conflict zones are taking place. So I think in that sense, the film, through the richness of its language, thanks to you, Clare, and thanks to Stephen's performance, it's almost doing visually what the pamphlet was trying to do in kind of publishing terms. And I suppose online access and publication, in inverted commas, allows that as well. In other words, you're not relying on broadcasting or the mainstream media, important in all as that is. So in that sense, I really think it's remarkable, rethinking of the pamphlet in a digital age. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Said said that Swift was driven by the occasion. The occasion is really important for, in Said's account of Swift, but driven by the occasion, but not limited to the occasion. And I think that's exactly the way this film went. Maybe we have one more. Maybe time for one more question. I think I would. Yes, thank you.
I think actually, like I say, I take a lot of hope and encouragement out of your film and the reaction we've had here this afternoon. As a British girl resident in Ireland for 20 years and having done a year in Derry before that, I find it very interesting that every person here wants the best. And having just got back from the UK, I was shocked because I expected some of my friends and family to be pro-Brexit. Their reaction is just the same as ours. So out of that, I thank you for the hope, and I hope you can maybe get it on with Love Island. Say like 15-minute albums, and I think that will get it out to a whole load of new people. If not, we need to make it into an hour because the BBC package everything in that. So I think Love Island is the way to go.
Stephen in a bikini.
So thank you both very much.
All right, this will be the last question, and then we're going to remember.
Hi, I also wanted to say thank you, so you stolen my point, but I wondered as a journalist, Clare, because one of the problems of living in the UK and having to listen to some of this stuff at the moment is that it's often done through shouty tweets, and the 24-hour journalism cycle leaves no space. And one of the things that I really loved about the film was there was a sense of stillness to it, a kind of meditation, as well as being a kind of pamphlet. So I just wondered if you wanted that particular form because of the way that the debate is or isn't being carried out at the moment.
Well, I suppose the form was offered to me, but I really enjoyed it because I don't like social media, so even though that's hypocritical to say, I'm not on social media, but I have it to thank for the film going viral, so it's a difficult spot. I feel that there isn't enough stillness, and we react very quickly to things if we're on if we have the ability and the form to dash out an opinion that we can garner within 2 seconds and tell everybody. So yeah, I feel that there's a place for a little bit of reflection and quiet, and also I've moved away from journalism per se now. So and luckily I don't have to kind of engage in the same way, but what I really like about this form is that you can, journalism becomes something else where you're documenting what's happening, but in a different way, if that answers the question.
So partly for your sakes, but also partly for Stephen's, since he's on again at 5:40, I'm finding authority in adding 5 minutes to our coffee break without objection. But not before we thank Clare and Stephen, not only for the panel discussion for this afternoon, but for the beautiful film in the first place and the great cultural intervention. Thank you both.